Welcome back to the Wolfpacker Show. My name is Noah Fletcher, and I'm the host, and we are back on podcast time. We had a little break. We're back. Football is back. It's a good time to be going in Raleigh. NC State coming off of a win over East Carolina 24-17 on Thursday night to get started off 1-0 here in the 2025 season. We're going to talk about that. We're going to recap really quick, give out a couple of game balls from that, and we'll dive into this weekend's game against Virginia. But before we get that, just some housekeeping notes to get rolling. My name is Noah, as I said, part of the Wolfpacker, which is a part of the On3 network, one of the fastest growing sites in all of college football. You can just go over there right now, $1 for your first week. You get access to everything that we have on our site, plus everything across the network. That's all 70 plus fan sites, plus all the national news and analysis from those people, including Andy Staples, Pete Nakos, who is the best at the transfer portal you can get, Chris Lowe, our new teammate who came over from ESPN. So it's the best time to jump in. $1 for your first month. Check it out on thewolfpacker.com. Before we dive into that, though, as you know, this week's episode is powered by BetMGM. We'll be using BetMGM for all of our lines throughout the season. We talk about favorites and point spreads. We'll dive into that later when Virginia conversation comes up. But when you join BetMGM, you get access to a variety of parlay selection features like same game parlays, live betting options, and more. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code ON3 and you'll get up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here is how it works. Download the BetMGM app and use code ON3. That's ON and the number 3. When you deposit $10 or more, place your first wager in any game, you'll get up to $1,500 in bonus bet if you lose. Just make sure to use bonus code ON3 when you sign up. Make this college football season one for the history books. Make it legendary. See betmgm.com for terms and conditions. 21 plus only. U.S. promotional offers are not available in New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Available in the United States. Call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY to 467-369. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP in Arizona. And if you're in Massachusetts, call 1-800-327-5050. Iowa, it's 1-800-BETS-OFF. And in Puerto Rico, it is 1-800-981-0023. First bet offer for new customers only. Subject to eligibility requirements. Rewards are non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire in 7 days. In partnership with the Kansas Crossing Hotel and Casino. Don't forget, if you haven't signed up for BetMGM, use bonus code ON3. Get your $1,500 first bet offer today. So we're going to dive in first to the NC State over East Carolina real quick. I'm just going to give a couple game balls for that one. That one's been talked about enough on the website. We did not have the podcast last week. Some technical difficulties that have since been addressed. And we're live and coming out to you right now. So NC State, as I said, won 24-17, survived a fourth quarter scare. East Carolina, 10 points in that last period. But NC State got the stop it needed from Jamel Johnson, a transfer from Temple. I'm going to give out two game balls. First one to CJ Bailey. He was 24-34 passing, 318, a touchdown, and a pick. He looked good. You know, he's a sophomore starter now. He looked a lot better than he did last year. More confident, I think, and that really impressed. He went down the field a bunch. 7 passes of 20 yards or more in the air. He completed 4 of them. That made up 171 of his 318 passing yards. He looked really, really good. I'm going to go with the defensive side of the ball. And the other one, Caden Fordham, he led the team in tackles. 11 total tackles, a sack, 2 TFLs, 5 solo stops in his return from a torn ACL ahead of schedule. He was in practice all through all fall camp. He earned the leadership, was a captain, earned the number 1 jersey from his teammates and Dave Dorn. So everyone really likes what they've seen from Caden. But overall, NC State starts off the year strong. They held East Carolina just 30 yards rushing on 29 attempts after East Carolina ran for more than 300 on them in the Military Bowl. Now, let's get set for Virginia. NC State hosts Virginia this weekend in a non-conference game. First time since 1948, these two teams' game will not count in the ACC standings, which is, I know, it's weird, but it is what it is. It's 2025. Dave Dorn has only played them 3 times before in his 12 seasons in Raleigh. He changed that home and home. They'll play him again next year in Charlottesville. Again, that one will not count for the ACC standings. But overall, Virginia comes into this game after a big 48-7 win over Coastal Carolina and former NC State offensive coordinator Tim Beck, former NC State quarterback MJ Morris, former NC State quarterback Grayson McCall, also on staff there. That one wasn't much of a game. We'll talk about more in just a second with our guest. But I mean, overall, it wasn't what you were looking for if you were Coastal Carolina. If you're Virginia, great start to the season. And, they're 1-0. Two teams at 1-0 coming into Raleigh this weekend. Let's check it with the conversation. We had Preston Willett on the pod. He breaks down everything Virginia you need to know going into this one. And then we'll check back with you on the other side and give you my prediction and a little bit other stuff we have rolling around NC State before we wrap things up. So here's our conversation with Preston. We're joined by Preston Willett of the Saber and Who's On podcast to talk UVA as Virginia gets set to visit Raleigh this weekend. Preston, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, man, excited to get down to Raleigh this week. I love North Carolina.
Yeah, it's one of those non-conference games. First time I think since 1948 that the two teams are going to play, not counting the ACC standings. So an interesting thing, but I mean, these are two teams that don't play that often to begin with. It's only their fourth time since Dave Dorn has been at NC State in the last 13 years.
I was gonna say it feels like it's been since 1948 since they played, so it's about right.
Definitely. Virginia coming off a big win over Coastal Carolina, over former NC State quarterback MJ Morris. Preston, what was kind of just some takeaways you had from that home opener in Charlottesville, and as UVA had a pretty commanding win over the Chanticleers?
I'll start with the defense because I think we've gone quickly to the offense a lot when we're breaking down this game just because of how explosive they were. But defensively, I was really impressed with the secondary. This is a lot of new pieces. I think almost entirely new pieces in that secondary, especially with Ethan Minter making his first start as a sophomore at safety, and then everyone else was transfers back there. So I was really impressed just to see how that came together because as of a couple days before that, we still didn't really know who was going to start at cornerback for this team because they brought in about like five or six transfers in the cornerback room, and we were still wondering like who's going to be the guy that come out there. So Donovan Platt, Army transfer, really stood out. I think he was one of their top graded guys on PFF after the game, so he looked really good. And they Devin Neal, safety from Louisville, who's a former All ACC guy, he looked pretty solid too. So the secondary was a big surprise. The other thing is. I hope y'all aren't like expecting to see the same guys on the offensive or defensive lines because they played 10 guys on the offensive line in the first half alone. And then they got into, more of the second, third stringer guys as we kind of went on through the game. Defensive line, they are rotating almost every other play. I think y'all are doing a lot of rotation too on the defensive line, so that at least looked familiar. It was so many guys flying in and out. I said, PFF has, a heck of a job ahead of them just trying to keep track of everyone. But a lot of new guys, but obviously the biggest star of the day was Cam Ross, the wide receiver. He was ACC receiver and specialist of the week, 224 total yards in that game, two touchdowns. Just looked electric out there, a former JMU guy. So he looks really good and really solid. So this is it's looking good so far. I think a lot of Virginia fans have been pleasantly pleased with what they saw in week one.
Definitely. You talk about rotating a lot in the offensive line. What's the philosophy behind playing, two waves of guys, basically a hockey line change you could have?
Yeah, well, you can look at the saber.com later because I'm working on a story about it right now because it's so unusual, right? They played around with it a little bit last year, but they didn't have nearly the depth that they have this year. They brought in a ton of transfers on the offensive line. Two of them are already out for the season, so they're not quite as deep as they expected to be. But yeah, I think the philosophy is just they worked a lot with different maturations of the offensive line throughout camp, so everyone's kind of comfortable with each other. So I mean, there was a drive there. They're starting right tackle Wallace Unamba, who's questionable or kind of game time decision for Saturday. He came out with an injury, so they put a couple different right tackles in there, and then one drive they just came out with an entirely different offensive line outside of the center, Brady Wilson, who's probably the constant in all this. Like he's the straw that stirs the drink, so to speak. But yeah, everyone else was changed out around him, and it was only for one drive in that first half, but it was a good drive. They scored a touchdown like right away. They moved right down the field, and I think it just shows that they've got the guys that can kind of swap in there if they do come down with an injury. And I think it was just giving those guys a chance to see snaps against first teamers. So I don't know if we'll see quite that many changes this week against NC State, but I mean it's a little curveball, I guess, if you want to throw it.
It definitely is. You talk about having a lot of transfers in the secondary. They've got transfers all over the place on the offense too. What did this offseason look like for UVA coming into this year? Kind of a make or break year maybe for this program a little bit.
I think it depends who you ask. For the media, it was exhausting, but for the coaching staff, I think it was really good. This was like the first offseason that they really dove into the portal, and they had a lot of resources come their way with anonymous donations left and right. And I think they really capitalize and use it in a good way. I mean, obviously, the big target was getting a quarterback in Chandler Morris, the transfer from North Texas, really experienced guy. And, from what offense coordinator Des Kitchings told me, he's the best fit at quarterback that they've had in the 4 years that Tony Elliott has been the head coach there. So that was a good start. And then they really built up the trenches, which has been the problem for Virginia ever since they got here, is they just don't have the depth. They don't have the talent. They don't have the size. But this year, it's a completely different offensive line, defensive line look getting off the bus. They look like big guys. They are big guys. You've got Jameer Carter, who's been a starter on this team since I think George W. Bush might have been the president the last time he didn't start a football game for UVA. I'm kidding, but he's been around this team for a long time. He only played 17 snaps in that first half, but they were able to use him and kind of get the most out of him because he wasn't exhausted from having to play that much. He's a big guy. So like having him play, 60 plus snaps and a half is going to be a lot for him. But yeah, he got to, kind of limit his snaps in that. And I think that's going to keep him more energized, and same thing with other guys too. So I think the depth has really helped, and that's been a big thing that Tony Elliott has wanted for years. I mean, he got to go back and play against Clemson last year, and he was like, "Oh yeah, that's what that looks like. That's what it looks like when you have depth and multiple guys that can play on both sides of the line."
Yeah, definitely. You talk about finding a quarterback that fits this offense. They had Brennan Armstrong who went to NC State eventually after. You have Anthony Musket or, Anthony Calandria or Tony Musket. How does Chandler Morris really, look different than those three guys that had been in this offense before?
Well, one thing is the experience. He's experienced, he played in the air raid last year, but I mean, he grew up around this Clemson style of offense because he was a kid, when his dad, Chad Morris, was there as an offensive coordinator. And Chandler told me that he had a playbook at recess that was kind of mimicking the Clemson kind of playbook. And that was what he was using with Brent Venable's sons. And so, like, yeah, he knows this offense and he knows kind of what he wants. And this offseason, him and Des Kitchings kind of sat down and were like, all right, what do you like? What do you don't like? And I think it kind of found a good balance for him. The biggest thing that surprised me is, he's only 6 foot, or as his center Brady Wilson kind of outed him yesterday that he was 5'10". He's moves really well in the pocket for a guy that size, and that's something that UVA struggled with last year. Anthony Calandria couldn't see the middle of the field, and so that's why he was running around like a chicken with his head cut off half the time, just trying to get something off, but always missing the wide open tight end in the middle of the field. Well, Chandler Morris tried to throw that pass right away in the first half. He kind of he looked it straight on, so he didn't look off the safety or the linebacker, whoever it was underneath. So it got tipped, but he's willing to throw that pass, and he can throw that pass, and he's looking for that pass. That's something that Virginia just hadn't had, and so his ability, just the experience that he has in the offense, but also his presence in the pocket to kind of move around and avoid the pressure. I don't think he really got touched at all in that game. So that's kind of been the best thing that we've seen from Chandler Morris so far. The other best thing is that he is healthy. He's going to play this weekend Saturday after not sliding at the best of his coaches and offensive linemen.
Yeah, this is a battle of two different kind of quarterbacks. You got Chandler Morris, 6 foot, the guy that's been around forever. CJ Bailey, 6'6", 6'7", young guy. When you look at Chandler Morris, how much is that experience really paying off? He hasn't played a ton. He played last year a lot at North Texas, but the first few years he really didn't play a ton. How much is just him being around college football paid off with this new look offense?
Yeah, I think it's paid off tremendously. I talked about him and Des Kitchings going through the playbook this offseason, and they had several meetings starting back in the spring through the summer and going into the fall. Just like, all right, what do you like? What's going to work for you? And I think we saw a lot of that in the opener of kind of where he wants to find his passes and stuff. He still likes to roll out and use his legs. His dad told me when I interviewed him for a story that he wanted to see Chandler run a little bit more. I don't know if he wanted to see him, run and take a huge hit right at the goal line there, but I think Chandler will learn from that, but it's shown in the fact that he's getting the ball out. He's accurate with the ball. I think he had 70% of his passes completed in that first game. He had one of the highest quarterback ratings of the week in his first start. It's good, efficient play, no turnovers, no sacks. He's not making the big mistakes yet. There were a couple balls that I was a little iffy on, so we'll see if that comes back to bite him, especially against better competition with NC State this week. But he looks the part of a veteran, and that's something this Virginia staff just hasn't had outside of Brennan Armstrong. But Brennan Armstrong was not a fit for this offense, and that was abundantly clear in that one year. And that was abundantly clear when I talked to him last month, and he was like, "It just wasn't going to work for me."
Definitely. And you talk about Coastal didn't get much pressure on Chandler Morris last week. NC State had just under 20 quarterback pressures against East Carolina. They're going to come after the quarterback. How do you think he'll be able to handle, pass rush where two pass rushers for NC State, Kean Sloan and Sebastian Harsh combined for 9 of the 18 pass rushes or pressures that NC State had last week?
Yeah, look, that's the biggest question for this UVA offense going into this week because Coastal Carolina, as Tony Elliott pointed out, played a lot of three-man rush. Didn't really try to get after the quarterback. They were trying to make it more difficult for Morris and kind of shorten the windows, make them smaller. It didn't work because an experienced quarterback can figure that out. I think the pressure is going to be really interesting to see because especially with the health question at right tackle for them with Wallace Unamba. If he is out, he's a guy that didn't allow a sack all of last season at New Mexico, coincidentally under former UVA head coach Bronco Mendenhall at the time. If he's out, then you're going to Jack Whitmer or Tyshawn Wyatt, a JMU transfer, who looked both good, but it's not your starting guy. So I think if he's out, that's going to be a little bit more of a question mark. Just can they kind of keep these pass rushers for NC State off their hands? And it's going to be a huge test for this offensive line. That's why I don't think we'll see as much rotation because it's like you need your best on the best going against NC State.
Yeah, for sure. That's going to be an interesting battle to watch. You talked about Cam Ross earlier. Transfer from James Madison, was at UConn before with NC State tight end Justin Jolie as teammates. He was the most explosive player in the field when I was watching the game this past weekend. Was that a surprise for you to see how explosive he really was in game one?
Yes and no. So all through fall camp, coaches were saying he was the offensive MVP. He really stood out, which is how hard he had worked. And it kind of took him a little bit of time because in the spring they were trying to make him like a backup to Trell Harris, who's kind of their deep threat receiver, just because he had that straight line speed. But I think after a while they realized, okay, no, this guy can do a lot more than just kind of be the backup receiver here. So they moved him to the slot position, and he's shown a lot of really good tendencies. He's a great route runner for a guy that has that athleticism. Usually guys like that just rely on the athleticism, but he's worked really hard. And I think the biggest thing that's held him back throughout his career has been catching the football. And that's, something that seems silly for a wide receiver, but over the summer, he said he caught 500 balls a day, which seems like just a arbitrary big number. And I was like, all right, did you just stand in front of the jugs machine for a while? And he was like, no, we like threw the ball to each other, like him and the other receivers. And as one of my friends pointed out, well, that means he was getting a lot of bad passes because none of those guys can throw. So he was getting like different angles and everything like that. And I think it really showed, 7 catches out of his 9 targets. He just looked really electric out there as far as a guy that can make stuff happen after the throw. His first, big catch was a 46-yard catch that he kind of had on the sideline and kind of weaved his way throughout defenders. And he has that speed. You could see it where like coastal defenders just looked like they were in like quicksand or something, and he just kind of ran past them, almost like it was a video game. So he was really impressive, and I think he kind of complements what Trell Harris can do on the outside, what Jamal Edgerrin, another transfer, can do on the other side as a bigger bodied wide receiver. So I think this receiver position that had a little bit of question marks going into the season actually might be a strength for this team now.
Yeah, he had 8 drops, I believe, last year at James Madison. Kind of the biggest reason why I think he ended up at UVA. But he also had a 100-yard kick return touchdown. We'll switch to that because UVA special teams played really well against Coastal Carolina. Also had a
Yeah.
blocked punt too, so obviously going to be a big priority. Did that surprise you how well, between his kick return touchdown, a punt block, that how well that unit really played?
Oh yeah. I mean, this is special teams has been a rough spot for Tony Elliott and this crew. Special teams coordinator, Keith Gaither, since they took over. It was really bad his first year, and it kind of incrementally got a little bit better each year. And then there was a point where they were just like, all right, we got to play starters, we got to play like our best players on these special teams unit, and that's what they're doing right now. The guys that were making those plays, Caleb Hardy's the one that blocked the punt. He's a former starter at safety who's been converted to linebacker. He's kind of a reserve player now, but that's the type of player that they have on these special teams unit. Trey McDonald was a guy that was competing for a starting linebacker job. He's now, on these special teams units. So like they have really talented players, and that's kind of like when the depth shows up, that's when on special teams, is when you have all these talented players kind of rotating in and playing roles there. And it was really surprising because it was the first time since 2019 they've blocked a punt. First time since 2019 they've returned a kickoff for a touchdown. It's something that we really haven't seen Virginia be prolific in. They have good kickers. And punter Daniel Sparks and the kicker Will Bettridge. But outside of that, the coverage units and the return units especially have been a little dicey at times.
Seems like they figured it out at least for week one. Before we get out of here, what is, one thing that Virginia needs to do well to be able to leave Raleigh with a win this weekend?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we mentioned already protecting against that pass rush from NC State. Can they keep Chandler Morris clean? That's something the offensive line took a lot of pride in. Their pass blocking grades look great on PFF, although they weren't facing as heavy of a pressure as they'll face down in Raleigh. So that's the biggest one. And then another thing offensively that I think some of y'all have picked up down there is, East Carolina had a lot of success when they're kind of going a little bit more up tempo. We saw Virginia kind of mess around with that a little bit in week one. It's something we know they can do. They just didn't have to do it as much against Coastal Carolina. You had like 10 minutes left in the fourth quarter and it's a blowout. You're trying to all right, let's milk this clock down, get this game over with. But can you catch NC State on some switches? That's something that Coastal actually did to Virginia in that first week. But can you catch them on some of these switches by going up tempo and, kind of get some favorable personnel? That's the big thing that Tony Elliott talked about before the season is they're looking for mismatches. They're looking to kind of headhunt, almost like in an NBA finals series where you're trying to find the weakest defender and put your best player on him.
Yeah, East Carolina scored their first touchdown on a up tempo. NC State tried to sub and it just turned into a nightmare. But
Yeah.
before we leave, where can people find your work leading up to this weekend's game?
Yeah, Saber.com as always has a bunch of different stuff that we're doing over there. Some game preview stuff. I've got a story coming out soon on the offensive line. I got a story about Cam Ross from this past weekend, so you can check that out. And also the Who's On podcast. We run twice weekly during football season because there's so much happening right now. We got a lot of good stuff coming up, including ESPN's Andrea Adelson, who's going to join me there. So I'm looking forward to this week and look forward to getting down to Raleigh. My favorite stop down there as always, is the pit. So I'm going to try to make a pit stop and get some barbecue before I leave town.
Definitely. Well, awesome. I appreciate you hopping on, Preston, and we'll see you this weekend.
Thanks, Noah.
Thanks to Preston for hopping on the podcast this week. He had a lot to say about Virginia, previewing this weekend's game. He'll be down here with the Virginia Media Corps on Saturday afternoon. That's a noon kickoff. NC State only favored by 3.5 on the BetMGM line coming into the game. That's what it opened at, and we'll see what happens. But NC State was unable to cover the spread against East Carolina. That one was a 2-touchdown game. Before we dive into my prediction on what to think about Virginia, let's give a shout out to Roback. They're another sponsor, another partner of the show. I've got on this nice hoodie right here. It's the most comfortable hoodie I've ever worn. I've got it in 4 different colors for a reason. The little dog, also a good touch on the shoulder. But there's only one way to describe Roback. It's best fit, best feel. For those who aren't familiar, Roback is completely changing the game with their incredibly comfortable activewear. They've released so many items across all of their collections, but one of their favorite collections that they have right now is the Licensed Game Day collection. They've got different polo designs, a hoodie, and Q-tips for some of your favorite schools, so go check it out. NC State is one of the partner schools that Roback has done a collaboration with. Plenty of cool stuff out there. Almost every ACC school, I think, is a part of it now. They've got a ton of different options. It seems like every day they come out with a new school. So if your school's there, use promo code NCS20 to save 20% off on your entire purchase. New customers only at roback.com. That's code NCS20 at roback.com. Save you a lot of money in your cart. Go get a hoodie like this. If you're an NC State fan, they've got hoodies like this with the state logo right on the chest. They've got some cool polos as well, a quarter zip, a little bit of everything. So go check it out at roback.com. All right, let's dive into this. We already heard from Preston about UVA and what they bring to Raleigh this weekend at Carter Finley Stadium. NC State, as I said, is a 3.5 point favorite going into the weekend. And what is my take on it? I think this is a game NC State covers. Yes, we talked about Chandler Morris. He's a good quarterback for UVA. NC State, though, has a secret weapon. Brian Nelson, transfer corner from North Texas. He played against Chandler Morris every day in practice last year. So I think that'll help. He knows what Chandler likes to do, what he doesn't like to do. He's already told his teammates about it. He's told DJ Elliott, the defensive coordinator, about it too. I think that's a big take. And then two, I think CJ Bailey, he looked really confident in the first game. I think that should continue on with Kurt Roper as they work through things in his first year as offensive coordinator. And NC State kind of, that week one, the week two jump is big in college football. It's big. And I expected to see it from NC State this year, both sides of the ball, especially in the offense. They jumped out to a 17-0 lead early against East Carolina. Let off the gas pedal a little bit. CJ Bailey talked about that. Justin Jolie also talked about kind of letting off the gas a little bit. I don't think that'll be an issue this week against Virginia. If they jump out to a lead, NC State will keep their pedal on the gas and keep it going. So I'm going to go final score prediction. I want to hear your guys' in the comments below on YouTube. You can tweet them at me at Fleischman_Noah. You can tell me on the message board on the Wolfpacker.com. But I'm going to go with 30-20 NC State win over Virginia. Dave Doran has only allowed Virginia to score 21 points in each of the first three meetings. Two of those came in Charlottesville, including a walk-off field goal in 2023. I think they keep them under 3 touchdowns. I think it's the first they'll hold them to a low in the Dave Doran era, per se, and keep it going. So that's my thing. That's my prediction. Let me know down below what your score prediction is, and we'll check back and see who got the closest next week. Rounding out today's podcast, we're just going to talk about some of the things going on in Raleigh. Women's basketball schedule just dropped the entire thing. We broke that down on the Wolfpacker.com. Men's soccer back in action Friday night against North Carolina. The Wolfpacker ranked fifth in the nation, its highest ever ranking in the program history. And the Pack, they're in a loaded conference. 6 of the top 10 teams are from the ACC. 3 of the top 5 in the ACC, including number 1 Stanford and number 3 Clemson. So it's a loaded ACC schedule. When the men get to the schedule, get to league play, that's going to be must-watch action at the Dale Soccer Field. Women's soccer still looking for their first win as well of the Gary Higgins era. Volleyball started 3-0 on their opening weekend. Big time wins there. They're looking for an improved season. They made the NCAA tournament last year, looking to get back, looking to get a win in the NCAA tournament. So, fall sports are in full swing. Football is here. Everything else is rolling. It's almost basketball time, and the Will Wade era is upon us. We're going to have all that too. We're back though on the podcast. We're going to do twice a week. We're going to do one on Wednesday, Thursday. That's the pregame show. I'm going to have a guest hopefully every week previewing that weekend's game, and then we'll do a post-game show on Sunday or Monday, depending on the week and availability and what we got going on the weekend. Hopefully we can get a guest for that. I'll keep you posted. I'm turning into a booking agency. So if anyone wants to join the show, reach out, let me know. Maybe you can come on. But I appreciate you listening. We'll be back next week. But thanks to our sponsors, BetMGM, as I said earlier, and Roback. Don't forget to use your Roback promo code today. Save some money, get some comfortable clothes, and look good. Just they look good. You can look good too. So I'll catch you guys back next week. Virginia, NC State, ESPN 2, noon Eastern on Saturday.